workshop, but because we are not here, because I cannot see you, what we are going to do is I am going to talk about how do we conduct qualitative evaluations, and then I am going to give you a homework so that at the end of the 2 sessions that we're going to have, once that we have finished these sessions, you can make this exercise so that you can see if you understood everything or if you have any doubts or questions. So the idea is that you do this so that you can clearly understand this. So of course, first you listen everything, but when you have to conduct the evaluations or when you have to do this, this is what we are going to do. So I am going to talk about this. I'm going to explain this. If you have any questions or doubts, you can write, and I am going to try to solve your questions or any doubts. So the content of this session is going to be explained in 3 sessions. So the first one is going to be qualitative evaluations. Then we are going to talk about qualitative analysis with a methodological emphasis. And then we are going to add some extra comments or remarks. So this is what we are going to do in these 2 days of work. And instead of doing the exercise, I am going to give you a homework, as I was previously mentioning. So what is the objective of this session? What are the 2 objectives? Well, first, this is an introduction. This means that you are not going to be experts in qualitative analysis or ethnographers. You are going to be good users concerning qualitative evaluations. And this means 2 things. First, for the ones who are public officials or the ones who are working in an organization or government body, and if you require an evaluation, then you are going to have the necessary tools to conduct a qualitative evaluation if you need one. So the first thing that you have to know when we finish these 2 sessions, when do I need a qualitative evaluation and what do I need? So in Mexico, these are reference terms, and reference terms include the tool concerning the application for a qualitative evaluation. But if you do not need a qualitative evaluation, what you are going to be able to do is you're going to need to have the necessary inputs to have the necessary methodological tools to understand a qualitative analysis or an evaluation in general, and to understand what elements should be included. So you're going to have the technical references and the methodological references to understand if the qualitative analysis evaluation that you are reading is a good one and if it is going to be useful for decision making. So at the end of this session, you are going to be able to identify the key elements that will allow you to see if a qualitative evaluation is useful and solid. So that is the objective of the session. The objective is that you have the necessary references so that you know when to use a qualitative evaluation and if the qualitative document is useful for decision making. So once that I have said this, the question that sometimes you might have when you are analyzing any instrument concerning qualitative analysis is this evaluation study, this is very well done, it has an amazing content. However, we need to analyze if this is useful for decision making. If we are public officials, we are using government resources or resources that come from from everyone. So we can use these resources by using an input that is not rigorous, for instance, or can we use these inputs when we are not sure that they are representative? Can we use these inputs when we are not sure that this can be generalized? So the answer is yes. However, we need to follow rules. We need to request and use qualitative inputs and evaluations, and they have to be rigorous and they have to follow rules. So we are going to talk this later on. But generally, there must be a lot of qualitative evaluations. And when we are conducting a qualitative evaluation or study, this has to be difficult to make decisions because this was not constructed by following specific criteria. So we can use criteria for decision making, but we have to follow rules. And we are going to start this session, and I want to clarify an idea that has to do with these rules. And well, from a certain point of view, one can say that there are no two methodologies in science. It doesn't mean that there is a quantitative methodology and a qualitative methodology, and one is rigorous and one has to do with anecdotes. So we need to start. I want to explain that science is one. So we have the scientific method, and then we have two estimates that can be used in accordance with the question that we want to solve concerning evolution or whatever we want to know. So if we want to know determinants, trends, then we need a quantitative evaluation. But if we have other kind of questions, then we need a qualitative estimate. So it is desired that we have a combined so that we can use this for different evaluations. But the first idea is we are not going to say that quantitative evaluations are not related to science, but we need to say that this is one method, and quantitative and qualitative evaluations can be systematic and scientific, and any of this are related to the same logic, and this logic is related to knowing something else besides the facts that we already have. So this is the same for both. And I'm saying this because it is very frequent, and also it is very common that when we ask people what do they understand by qualitative evaluation or study, they say things like the ones I said in the beginning. They say that they are going to conduct a study, and they are going to find out, they are going to analyze the different points of view, and then we're going to interview some people, and then we are going to select them because they illustrate an idea or an argument that we have. So of course this is going to, we're going to have to get to know the different points of view. However, these are only related to them. So because we cannot, this is not general for a specific population, then we cannot assume that this has to do, that this is scientific and that this can be generalized. Something that is also said concerning qualitative evaluations is that this is giving a face for numbers, for instance, or also other kind of things concerning this. Maybe you have already heard this. So yes, this can be true. This is a way of conducting quantitative evaluations, but this is not what we are going to use or to highlight in this session, because this is not useful for public decisions, because of course these are studies or they are not useful. So the question that we have here is, how do we include inputs for this? So in these slides, we are going to have a type of evaluation that has to do with decision making concerning technical procedures, and it has to do with decision making. So And so this is what we are trying to achieve. Let me think what else concerning the introduction. So if you have any questions, so please let me know. And if you do not have any questions, we're going to delve into it. So if what I am saying is not useful for qualitative evaluations, then what is useful? Okay, so let's start explaining this. And because of my experience and my background, the emphasis concerning qualitative doesn't have to do with a general analysis or qualitative evaluation. This is a qualitative analysis, and we are going to talk about ethnography. But in social sciences, on the contrary, we leave these are diverse disciplines, or they have theoretical paradigms. And many times when we analyze a concept, we use the same words to refer to to things that are very similar, or to categories that have similar contents. So sometimes we also analyze phenomena and we think that we have the same theoretical reference, but we do this from anthropology or ethnography, but we are analyzing different things. So the same happens with this ethnographic approach. When we talk about ethnography, sometimes we think that we are referring to ethnography, and of course we all understand what ethnography is, but this is not the case. There are three different ways to understand ethnography, and ethnography is a conceptual space. It is a discipline that comprises different points of view, and I want to systematize concerning the what I have said. There are 3 points of view, and first we have to understand ethnography in a consistent way. Where concerning this, for instance, ethnography should not apply a procedure or a methodology that is different from any other methodology in any other scientific method. So of course we are going to have methodological aspects, but the inference logic is the same as other disciplines. So this point of view is of course not the most popular, and sometimes this is highly criticized. So in the discipline that has a postmodern paradigm, this is highly criticized, and the label that it is sometimes labeled as positivist. This is not very precise, but this has to do with the fact that it is highly criticized. So this point of view is highly criticized because there is an emphasis that is postmodern, and it says that ethnography is as a scripture. For instance, Marcus has defended this point of view. I forgot the other name of the author that also was very important. Okay, it doesn't matter. But people like Marcus, and he says that this methodological vision concerning the positive point of view is just a way of doing things. This is just a scientific narrative concerning modern times, and of course this has to do with other types of stories to understand reality. So this other point of view gets rid gets rid of the scientific status, and the kind of ethnography that they are going to do, it doesn't have to do with the scientific method, and they understand this as a type of
You are currently the only
narrative
person in this
or
conference.
story. And in ethnography, what they do is that they try to analyze what everybody else is doing. How do they live from their own narratives and points of view? So of course, this is on the other side of a positive point of view or vision. So this is a way of doing science. This is not the main one. And of course it has a strong content concerning control. And so we're going to talk ethnography. We're going to analyze reality from a different point of view. So there is also an intermediate part. This is a vision concerning ethnography. This is a reflexive or critical point of view. And in this case, they search to include the ethnography as scripture and ethnography as and positive ethnography. So this third point of view says, okay, we do not want to stop doing science, but we want to be included within this paradigm, but we do not want to be genuine, or we need to have a spontaneous relationship. So what we are going to do in this case is, yes, we conduct qualitative analysis. We are going to include the criticism that we have received, and we are also going to include several ideas to be able to program our relationship with reality. And this is the third point of view. So as you might already know, we are going to talk about a point of view that is closer to the critic or positive point of view, because we want to do science, but we are not going to do this we are going to do this in a way that we can use this for decision making. We need to have solid information with valid inferences. We also need to have internal validity elements and external validity elements. But of course, this has to be, we're going to think about this. We need to program this, and we are going to focus on the triangle in the slide, the green triangle. So it is very important that you keep in mind this. So what we're going to say is just a way of talking about ethnography. Of course, there are other approaches from a qualitative point of view to develop knowledge, but this is just one of them. So we picked this not necessarily because this is the one, but this is the best one for the kind of decision making or the kind of knowledge that we need for public policy and for decision making. So that's why we are using this one. And so now that we talked about the point of view, we are going to talk about qualitative. And the first question that we always have is, what is qualitative analysis? If we already know that this is not just giving a face to numbers and understanding meaning and emotions, then what it is? What is it? So we are going to analyze some ideas so that we can understand what is qualitative analysis. So first, qualitative analysis, and in this first slide, qualitative analysis is a set of techniques that are not subject to statistical analysis. So these are techniques that are not useful for, they are only going to generate information, but they are not going to be useful to calculate means or variances or a variation coefficient or standard regressions. So this is not going to be useful for this. And second, qualitative analysis is going to be that approach to reality, and it is based on techniques that we can synthesize into phrases. And I think that these phrases are very clear, and these are direct observation techniques in natural situations and in interviews as conversations. So what we want to do is to get closer to situations, to unnatural situations, because of course we need to analyze day-to-day situations. So we need to observe, get to know how certain units work. For instance, a family, a school, a health clinic, a company. So we need to analyze how it works on a daily basis, and want to analyze this in the most natural way. And also, what we want to do is to talk with the people who are included in this context. But of course, not we do not want to have a survey with specific questions that we need to rephrase and read in the same way and in the same order. But on the contrary, what we are trying to do is we are trying to have interviews that are very similar to conversations, and conversations like the ones we regularly have. Of course, they do not follow a specific order, and they include different subjects. And of course, we need to include the priorities, the interests, and of course, the way in which people talk. So qualitative analysis is aims at coming closer to reality or understanding reality, just as just how people live on a daily basis, or what they do on a daily basis. So these the things that I have mentioned are included in the ethnographic analysis. So of course this has to do with direct observation and also interviews as conversations. So in that sense, what we are trying to do is we we are trying to have access to a specific group. And by group I mean families, health clinics, micro companies, government organizations, any space with people. So we are going to do this by doing direct observations and by conducting interviews, so that we can share their reality and so that we can establish a shared subjectivity with them and share their reality, so that we can understand what they are, so that we can understand how they live, how why they are doing what they are doing, and also the different references that we have. So what we are trying to achieve is that our evaluation is based on intimacy. So this is a we need to get closer to these people. So if we do this, what we are going to guarantee is that we're going to have reliable information and data. Why? Well, because we are going to be able to come closer to these natural situations, and we are going to build rapport with the ones with the people, and we are going to get to know their points of view. And of course, in different work sessions that are going to be formal and informal. So for instance, interviews. And as time goes by, of course, we're getting closer to them. They are not that formal anymore, so we're going to start building rapport, and this is going to allow us so that every statement is very solid, because of course we're going to get to know the different points of view, and this is going to allow us to have inferences and reliable inferences. So in order to achieve this, a basic tool that we are going to analyze later is triangulation. So triangulation is going to allow us to rephrase in different times in different interviews with the same people or with other people, and we are going to be able to do this with different topics or subjects. So the information that we obtain from from one person, we're going to try to analyze the different points of view. Maybe we are going to have different contradictions or different hues. So when we have an inference concerning an intervention or a program in a specific observation and analysis unit, then we are going to be this is going to be reliable information. So the main idea here is that with qualitative analysis that we are going to guarantee that every inference is based on data, that is on reliable information and data. So this should lead us to a process analysis. And we are going to understand process as a mechanism or action or interaction that link causes and effects. And in this case, we are focusing on programs evaluations. So the effects of a program can be explained with coefficients or regressions or factorial weights, and this is going to allow us to analyze the we're going to have reliable information. But when we have qualitative impact evaluation, what we're going to try to know or to do is to understand these different measurement points, so T1 and T0, T2 and T1 and T2. So what we're going to have, we're going to obtain information that we cannot obtain with a qualitative information. For instance, the processes that in activities made by people link causes and effects. So this is what we're going to find. We're going to have a coefficient for qualitative evaluation, so the effect of a program. What we want to know is what happens on a daily basis and in reality. So what people do that have to do with an intervention in a measurement unit and specific observation unit. And this allows us to understand how this change happens in this context. So a key word that you have to highlight and remember throughout these sessions is the word that we have in orange: social generative processes. And this means that we want to understand the narrative of a story step by step of how a social phenomenon happens, or how a company achieves to have an increase in an indicator because of a public program. For instance, if we are going to find a coefficient that is going to provide information concerning the net variation, and with a qualitative impact evaluation, we are going to establish the causal mechanisms that led this indicator to have a variation. So for this identification process, and we're going to, this is going to be known as generative social processes. And so with everything that I have been saying so far, we can now say that ethnographic analysis can play a very important role in social causality, because of course we need to explain the different types of associations in statistical terms. So now that we have our model, now that we have a treatment and control group, and now that we measured this before the intervention and after the intervention or program, and with this, now we know the net variation of our intervention. So qualitative evaluation is going to allow us to know why something happens, and if this is related to the implemented program and to other alterations and other factors that can be homes. They can be household factors, they can be communitary factors, institutional factors, or other types of factors. So in that sense, ethnography is going to show us how a distribution or association or coefficient is generated from below, or from the concrete action of individuals that can be either public officials, the beneficiaries of a program, people in a clinic, or people working in a productive unit, in a small scale productive unit. So what we are going to say is what we are trying to achieve in a qualitative analysis is to have a we're going to link theories and facts and the hypothesis with generative processes, and how a and why there is a change in a analysis unit when we implement a program or any kind of intervention. So we need to clearly understand that when we conduct a qualitative impact evaluation or a qualitative analysis in general, what we are trying to achieve is we are trying to do something that has to do with the slides, with the words to the left. So what we are trying to achieve with a qualitative analysis, we're trying to understand the trends or the determinants of a social phenomena, the how everything changes over time, and the determinants and the statistical factors that determine. And in that sense, we're going to talk about variables. We're going to talk about random variables, and the vision concerning reality is going to be statistical. So we already know that a qualitative analysis, and in this case, we're going to emphasize the actions and interactions of individuals and also the context in which these actions and interactions are conducted. And then we're going to have three elements: factors, processes, and scenarios. So with actions and interactions in a specific context, we need to analyze the factors that can be known as variables that are related and that generate an analytical scenario, so that we can analyze the results of a program. So also a set of factors that systematically um, in a company or in a house, and the ones that are not successful, and the situations in which the program is going to achieve its results. So instead of variables, we're going to talk about factors. And instead of having a vision concerning probability, we are going to talk about we are going to have a deterministic vision or point of view. And why do we have this? Well, this we're going to have this because our variables, so to say, are already defined when we have a qualitative analysis. So we already know what is going to be the result of what is going on with our individuals. We are already analyzing this and we are observing this, and we want to understand what happened or how do we achieve this through identification of factors, through the identification of different types of factors that lead to different analytical scenarios and that also lead to different results. So in this case, we say that we have a deterministic vision in contrast with the random variables related to qualitative analysis. So please keep in mind that even if you have a qualitative analysis or a qualitative vision, we are always going to conduct our evaluation based on four things. First, and this is fundamental, theory. So what we do when we conduct an impact evaluation is we relate theory and facts, different analysis categories, and what is happening in reality, and in quotations, reality. And so to be able to do this, we need to get to clearly understand theory. So we cannot conduct an impact evaluation if we do not understand theory or the theory of change behind a program, or the general theory that has to do with the observation that we are currently doing. So this is a very common mistake that we make when we start conducting evaluations or research. We need to know what has been done before. So generally, we think that we are Robinson Crusoe, and we think that we live in isolated knowledge islands, and that this is the first time that we are going to conduct an evaluation like this, or either a research or evaluation. So of course, we do not analyze or take into account the knowledge that we have that has been previously been acquired. So we need to understand the research, the different documents or papers, the evaluations, the databases, and the knowledge that is already there concerning a specific subject. So now we are going to talk about the information or data, and in this case, we are going to start to build a critical relationship between the different categories and the empirical aspects. So how are we going to relate this? Well, the three things that I said before: direct observation of reality, experimentation, and measurement. But of course, you might say, okay, so how are you going to measure this if you're conducting a qualitative analysis? So what we say is that measurement is not the only thing that is not only related to numbers. This is also related to logic operations, and this is the kind of operations that we use when we are conducting ethnographic and qualitative analysis. We use these measurements to say that something is different from other thing concerning, because it has different characteristics. So this is part of the same measurement process. And also, there are two types of qualitative analysis that we can conduct, and we have to clearly understand this. So in the slide that you are currently seeing, there is a matrix or some squares. So I suppose that right now and so far, you already know what this is, right? So this matrix that you have in your slide is a logical framework matrix. So as you can see, it has 4 rows and 4 columns, and one of the rows contains a different different analysis. We have components, we have outcomes, purpose, and activities. So where do we have the impact evaluation? Okay, impact evaluation, as you already know, has to do with the outcome or purpose. And when we conduct qualitative evaluations, we are going to stay in this level. If we want to implement an impact qualitative evaluation, the levels that we're going to use are purpose and outcome. And if we want to know how components and activities work, then we're going to have a kind of qualitative analysis that we can use, and this is going to be the process evaluation. I think that you already analyzed this, but I want to say is that I want to explain the level that we're using, and the levels that we're using is outcome and purpose. So everything has to do with outcome and purpose. Okay? And also, there are two things that are very important, and qualitative evaluations can be useful for public officials to understand the generative processes concerning the impact of a program, impact understood as outcome, and also to identify key factors that also contribute or that can hinder this work, and we cannot achieve results. So in this case, everything that I have said in my workshops so right now we are going to make an exercise. We are going to have different teams, and here I explain the dynamics that we are going to have in this class. But because we are not together in the same classroom, I am not going to stop. We are going to move forward. But this has to do with introduction. So what we need to clearly understand is, what is a qualitative evaluation? How do we distinguish qualitative evaluation from ethnographic evaluations? And also, we need to have a general idea of qualitative evaluation and how we are going to understand this, because later on we are going to talk about a very specific subject, or we are going to explain this. This is not going to be a general topic. And in slide 37, I am going to explain what we are going to do in this session and in the following one. So first, we are going to talk about how we have an analytical sample. We're going to talk about ethnography. We're going to talk about the different techniques of an ethnographic analysis. We're going to describe field work. What do we do in field work to have to obtain information, and what do we do with that information? So we're going to have a case study, and how are we going to achieve generalization. And we're going to start talking not concerning statistics, but we're going to talk about qualitative analysis. So what we have in the slide, this is the path that we're going to follow, okay? So we are going to start with the analytical sample. Just give me 1 second. I am going to drink water. So something that can be very useful is samples in analytical analysis. So of course, we also use samples in analytical analysis. So when we use or when we conduct an evaluation and when we select individuals, we already have a sample. So whenever we decide to speak with a specific individual, we are already having a sample. So we are doing this in a spontaneous way. And maybe the sample that we are going to have is going to be terrible. So it is better that when we conduct a quantitative analysis, we need to analyze the criteria concerning the sample, because otherwise we're going to say things that are not supported by facts, or that are biased because of the design. So in an evaluation that is not qualitative, in many cases what they are trying to do is to interview people that are closer, or the ones that are easier to build rapport, the ones that are smiling, or the ones who the ones that do not need a lot of research, the ones that are close, or that we do not need to wait, and the ones that are really nice. So if we do this in this way, of course it is very cool, right? But what we're doing is that we are having a biased selection, because we're not selecting the individuals that are going to be included in the sample. We are selecting them just because they are nice and convenient. So it is also very frequent that they select cases because they confirm the ideas that they already have. So they have already a specific idea, and then they find someone that has the same idea, and they choose that specific individual. And this is okay in specific studies. But of course, this is not useful for us, because we want to make decisions concerning public policy. And if we do this in these 3 ways that I have already described, because of judgment or because they confirm our ideas, of course, this is not going to allow us to make inferences beyond those case studies. So we are going to criticize, and we are not going to use this approach. And what we're going to do, we are going to build something that is known as analytical sample. And an analytical sample is going to formulate in an explicit way a series of relationships, of theoretical relationships between midterm approach concepts that are related to our intervention, and that are going to and that we are going to analyze how they are related. And based on these ideas, we are going to build the profile, the theoretical profile of the individuals with whom we are going to talk, or the ones that are going to be interviewed. So in this way, we're going to reach a point that when we talk with Adrialis, Ale, Analicet, Aura, Leticia, we are going to talk with these individuals not because they are very nice, or not only because they have the same similar ideas, or not only because they are easy to interview because they live close. We are going to talk to them, and we are going to interview them because they have specific and certain characteristics that are relevant and that make these individuals, and they are included within a group that we want to evaluate and that we want to know. And we're going to do this through an analytical sample. So in the next slide, in first place, as I said before, an analytical sample is built. It includes concepts that are relevant, and also we are going to start with a hypothesis, and this is going to support the fact that specific differences in our cases, we're going to have these differences, and therefore there are different relationships between homes, schools, companies. And this difference and theoretical differences based on a hypothesis, they are going to lead us to classify individuals in different categories. And later on, we're going to analyze some examples so that we can understand these ideas that can be very general. So as I have said before, an analytical sample is going to be built based on knowledge and on a specific field work that we want to evaluate. So we are not going to build this matrix based on our good ideas, or based on what we think should be, but based on specialized by bibliography. And we have to understand this as the evaluations or documents or academic documents that include information concerning what we want to research. So we're not going to do this based on what we think is best, but based on the specialized documents and papers. And we need to keep in mind that when we develop this analytical matrix, what we are trying to achieve, we're not trying to achieve a generalization. We are not trying to look for a statistical representation or a confidence level concerning specific margins that lead us to, so that the sample size is relevant. So here it is very important that size doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how big the sample is. What we want to do is that we need to have a theoretical contrast concerning the different individuals and the different categories that we want to observe. So we do not want to have a big sample or a random sample. We rather want to have a sample that allows us to analyze contrasts between the different individuals. And of course, they are different. And this distinction that we have in the specialized documents will allow us to achieve the different results in our program. So the number of cases is going to be important if it is related to a concept that we are going to see later on. So of course we are going to need to have more focus groups, more cases, only if we have not reached this point, but not because we need to have a generalization. And the cases that we are going to select, they are going to be relevant but only concerning general theoretical matters. So that's why theoretical importance is going to be very important, and this is going to justify the cases that we're going to select. Of course, this is not going to be, it doesn't matter if he or she lives close to my house, or if he or she is really nice. We need to select individuals because they have specific characteristics that are relevant concerning theoretical terms. So that is to say that when we have a sample in a qualitative evaluation, we follow rules, and these are explicit rules. So we also follow rules in this case, and these rules are based on theory. And a basic theory that we need to clearly understand is the theory of change. So of course we so far we already understand what is a theory of change, right? And what we want to do in this case, we want to make explicit specific things. So first, we need to say that the theoretical categories that we're going to use to build our sample are the ones that are related to what we know as independent variables. Why? Well, because if we select our cases based on dependent variables, what we are generating is we are having a selection bias. So I am going to give you an example. For instance, if we want to evaluate a program that is fighting poverty, and we select our cases because we want to make a contrast between concepts, then I am going to select the participants and the ones that are not that poor. So if we do this in this way, we are already having a selection bias because we are selecting the variability range of the factors that can make differences. So on the contrary, what we need to do is, okay, our program has to do with fighting poverty. So what is the theory of change behind this program? So what the program says concerning poverty, and what we can do to decrease this. So my program says that poverty is generated because there are high migration levels, or there are not so many jobs. So we have indigenous population or Afro-American population. So of course everything leads to poverty. So these are the analysis categories, and the analytical matrix should include these characteristics and not based on poverty. Because of course, if I do this, of course I am already selecting the results that I am going to achieve. For instance, high birth levels, and people get married really young. Of course, they have many children. These children attend schools that are not good for them, and then they have to work because they have to contribute to their house, and they have to work and provide money. So of course these jobs are terrible. They do not have good job conditions. They do not they do not have good incomes. So of course this cycle is repeated. So these children also get married really young, and of course the same thing happens. They tend to have a lot of children. The same children go back to do not continue studying because they have to provide an income. So these are the categories that are going to allow us to build an analytical matrix. So we do not need to consider the poverty characteristics. And in the second bullet, this has to do with not having enough information. And if when we select our cases, our poverty cases in the different categories, we are not going to be able to apply a survey for many people. So what we're going to do is we are going to generate different observations concerning the amount of cases that we have. So if we have many observations, we're going to have many conversation records, direct observations, or this is going to allow us to understand how the different processes related to what we want to know happen. So in that sense, the recommendations to build analytical matrices, for instance, if we do not have a lot of cases, we need to select the cases that provide variability or diverse cases. So we're going to choose cases because, of course, we need to have contrasts. And if we take into account the fact that that many times we can have more cases, not only 4, 5, 6, then we can start building, we can have contrasts or hues concerning the different categories. So we're going to have 1, 2, or 3 intermediate hues, and then we're going to have to make a contrast, and we're going to try to have inferences, and we're going to have conclusions. And here I want to talk about something that is very important, and this has to do with error. So I am going to talk about this in the 2 sessions that we're going to have. And the criticism that concerning qualitative or quantitative analysis are related to the sample size and the sample selection. So there is one that is more complicated, and this has to do with the error term. Because when we have a statistical measurement, we already have a coefficient that is going to provide information concerning the error term in our measurements and what we need in a sample to identify the impact of a variable. And in this case, we do not have this. In the qualitative analysis, we cannot identify an error measurement that is explicit. But what we can do is that we can include this in the theoretical design. And this is going to allow us to have less errors, but we're not going to be able to estimate the size. So this is the path that in abstract and theoretical terms we follow to be able to have an analytical sample. And I am going to show you an example concerning the qualitative evaluation to a program known as Opportunities in 2001 and 2002. And this was a very interesting evaluation because this was one of the first qualitative evaluations in Mexico that included this things that I have mentioned. So I am going to share the link so that you can analyze and you can check them if you want to do so. But if you are interested in analyzing this, I think that it is really helpful if you analyze what we have here, because in Mexico in 2001 and in the 2000s, it did not exist an institutional organization concerning programs. I am not sure. I do not know what happens in your different countries, but I do not know if you are already familiarized with this case, but here in Mexico, we have a social development regulation, and it establishes that the evaluation of social programs should be mandatory, and this has to meet specific characteristics. And then they describe the different evaluations that we had that have to be conducted. For instance, if this is a diagnosis, a design, an impact evaluation, or a results evaluation. But this did not exist in 2001 and 2002. So it's the program that started this is the program known as Prospera, and that was previously known as Prospera, and that was previously known as Opportunities. So this was created in 1997 during the administration of President Ernesto Zedillo. So this program, as can tried to start conducting impact evaluations. So this was never done in Mexico. Of course, there were programs that were evaluated. Some of them were evaluated, but this program included an impact evaluation, and this program included a qualitative evaluation and also a quantitative evaluation that the IFPRI conducted. So IFPRI is the International Food Policy Organization Institute in Washington, and it conducts evaluations and studies concerning food. So what happened here is that the people who are working there wanted to evaluate the impact, so they designed a program that was Progresa, and that was going to be able to be evaluated in this way. And the characteristic of this program was that public officials of this program decided to analyze the intervention and the individuals that were going to be included. So because this had to do with a resource problem, they were trying to find the people who were suffering from extreme poverty, but of course they did not have interviews of information for this, so they used a proxy. And in Mexico, there was a marginalization index that included different townships and communities and different localities. So what the program tried to do is they decided to use three focus matters. And first, it had to do with geography. So they analyzed different communities with high poverty levels, and they conducted a survey, and this survey was applied to the whole community. So more than a survey, it was a sort of census, because a survey implies a random characteristic and a sample. And in this case, this was not done. When they reached this marginalized communities, they started to apply the survey, and then this survey included the socioeconomic and socio-demographic characteristics, amongst many other things. And this allowed, through the application of a statistical analysis known as discriminative analysis, and then they analyzed the ones that were below and above a poverty threshold that was included, and the ones that were below were going to obtain benefits. But someone said, okay, but that number below the poverty level are more because we do not have enough resources. And here the experimental design started, because what they did is that they selected communities, they selected them randomly, and then they provided they obtained benefits. And the ones that are poor, because they knew that, and the ones that were not included in the random communities, they obtained the benefits, but after. So in this case, they obtained the benefits 1 year later. So this story that I am telling is the story that the public officials told, but what this is explaining is how the specific conditions were created for an impact evaluation from the beginning. So they selected the different places where the survey was going to be applied. The survey was applied for everyone, so that they knew the socioeconomic level and the social demographic characteristics of everyone, and they selected the ones that were poor in accordance with an analysis. And once they knew who were poor and the ones who were not poor, the program was applied for the ones who lived in some communities and not in others. So if you are already familiarized and if you already understand an impact evaluation, you already know that there was a treatment group and a comparison group that were the same. However, some of them were going to be included in the program and the others were not going to be included. And besides, they built the foundations to conduct a a treatment group, a control group. So what they did is that they had a difference before they obtained treatment, received treatment. So they already have information of the poor people who are going to eventually receive support. So after this, they started to conduct evaluations with surveys that were conducted every 3 6 months of the ones who were interviewed in the beginning. So in this way, they had a measurement concerning the treatment group, the control group, and a measurement before and after the intervention. So in this case, this is sometimes known as a double difference analysis, and this allowed to build the foundations for a qualitative and quantitative analysis in Progresa in 1997 and 2002. And this evaluation was conducted by IFPRI in that period, but from 2000 and in the subsequent years, this program started to grow. And concerning when there was a change in the administration, this was a very difficult administration because this was the first time that PRI did not win. So this was the first time in that more than 70 years that the president did not belong to the same political party. So the problem with this was that this program belonged to PRI, but it had to do with the fact that this program was rendering results because it had an effect. And of course, this program grew because also included other urban areas and metropolitan areas. So this first, they attended semi-urban localities, and there they tried to reproduce the characteristics of semi-urban localities. So they use the design example that was used in rural areas. So in this case, in the slide that you are currently seeing, that has to do with qualitative evaluation in 2001 and 2002, they selected the homes that were going to receive or to be included in the program in 2001. However, it wasn't possible for qualitative evaluation to measure or to have field work before they started to receive the benefits. Well, first, because the selection of the individuals was not only related to an interview to the individuals that lived in rural areas, but they were following the procedures and the individuals were aware of this, and they said, okay, so the ones that think that have this specific characteristics, you can go to the different offices and you can participate in this. So this and other changes that I am not going to mention now, but that are included in the document that I'm going to provide you. And that's why this program did not allow for field work. So what was done is that in 2001, they visited the families that obtained the benefits that were selected, but that did not receive benefits, but that were about to receive the benefits. So this idea had some difficulties because when it reached farms, communities, and townships, we realized that some of them have already received them once, twice, or 3 times. So what was done is that they started working with those families that did not receive the benefits, but that were about to receive them, or that have already received them once or twice. And this was a first example of a field work. So there was a baseline. And 1 year later, the before this was done in families that already received the benefits and the ones that did not receive them, but in places where they think that many families were about to receive the benefits, but at some point the program, for instance, we went to a community where the process had already happened, and we went to another community, B community, where the process was about to happen. We were not aware, we do not knew when, but we already knew that there were poor homes that were going to receive the benefits. So the researchers had to go to places with poor families. They had to interview them, and they had to verify that the characteristics that we were thinking that they should have, and if they had them, and if they had them, we had to interview them. So this was a very long process with many difficulties, because of course it is not the same if we have already a list including the beneficiaries. And the problem with this was that we do not know. Of course, we had many difficulties, but based on the expertise of the researchers, we searched for the other homes that could be included in a control group. So they were interviewed in 2001. We came back in 2002 we analyzed the same families, and then we tried to identify to establish the changes during the first measurement and the second measurement. So as you can see here in the story that I am telling, we already have bullet 1, which has to do with the fact that we tried to build an evaluation design concerning double difference, a before and after treatment group and control group. We also had an analytical matrix of the communities that had specific or relevant characteristics that were related to the theory of change of the program. Also, we used a sample framework concerning the different places, because at the same time we also had a quantitative evaluation that was conducted by the public health institution, and it had the samples. So the qualitative team had that sample, and this was something that was very important because we used this as a framework. And the independent variables that were taking into account to develop the analytical matrix, we had 5. And first, the size of the localities. In Mexico, we used to do this. The rural localities were the ones that have 2005 individuals. But of course, there is a difference between those semi-urban localities and the ones that have almost 15,000 inhabitants and the ones that have more. Because these localities, given the fact that they are very big, sometimes they do have characteristics that are related to rural areas. They, of course, so we had this difference. We made this difference, and then we have 50,000 and 1 million inhabitants, and more than 1 million inhabitants, and these are big cities and metropolitan areas. So these territories include different townships, for instance, in Mexico. So a first independent variable was including something that was going to make differences. For instance, if the townships or localities were semi-urban or small, because of course this is going to imply rural infrastructures, and the other ones are of course closer to a urban infrastructure. And the second independent factors were social demographic, and we included fertility, immigration, and mortality. So these three elements are the most important elements of a ethnographic analysis, and from a first point, we use this as a reference for the houses with high fertility levels, high mortality levels, and high migration levels. So these three characteristics are and used to be specific characteristics of poverty in Mexico. So besides a socio-demographic characteristic that was very important to include was indigenous population, because the proper organization of indigenous peoples or the kind of communities where they live, this information can lead to a specific results. So we also made a difference, and we also made explicit the different activities, the ones that were rural areas, or for instance oriented towards subsistency, and the ones oriented towards trade, or in Mexico, the ones that are close to be ejidos, which is a traditional organization concerning rural areas, and the areas that were oriented towards industrialization or trade and other types of organizations. And these five characteristics were included in the analytical matrix. The main objective had to do with what is explained in the last bullet. So the aim was to establish if the houses changed because of the program Progresa, and second, if the program had a specific effect on specific localities and houses based on the categories that I already explained. And based on this, an analytical sample was built. So if I remember, the 9 territorial units were visited from the north of the country, Sausal in Baja California, and this was a agricultural place, and also rural areas, indigenous and rural areas, and also other areas like farms. These areas did not include indigenous people, and these areas included agricultural activities, and also other areas that were that had to do with agriculture, small villages or towns. And based on that scheme, on that evaluation scheme, there were other evaluations in the following years. In 2001, there was the baseline of semi-urban areas. Then in 2002 and 2003, it had to do with metropolitan areas. In 2004, there was a rural visit, and so on and so forth. So concerning this and the Progresa program that was known as Prospera, what was able to be identified is that there were some factors, some analytical elements that were systematically repeated, and that specialized documents said that was important, and some of them could be confirmed given the different evaluations that were conducted. And of course, it was verified that they were important and that they were relevant for the context of Mexico and for this program. So the systematization that was conducted is that every quantitative evaluation had to consider at least 5 types of factors that systematically explain the results. And the first of them was the lifestyle of the population. Second, social demographic characteristics, composition, and other characteristics that were very important, such as mortality, immigration, and mortality, and other basic characteristics, for instance, gender, sex, and indigenous and non-indigenous. And also the relationship with social programs that is expressed by the fact that you are a beneficiary or you are not a beneficiary, and also the exposure time to programs. And this was the result of these evaluation or the evaluations that were conducted. So they found something like this. So now let me say that I am aware of the fact that so far I have not made explicit how do we make a analytical sample. We have not analyzed this, and this is something, of course, so far I want to ask if you have any questions or doubts, because of course sometimes how do we make an analytical sample. So of course what we are going to do now, I am going to give you an exercise. So we are going to have teams, and let's suppose that you are evaluating teams and you are hired by someone, and you have to have an analytical sample. So this could be a very interesting exercise, and this could be your homework. So this could be the homework concerning these sessions, and maybe this is going to be the homework. But before, I want to provide the answer, because this is the exercise that takes a lot of time, because of course I can use this to draw this, and we can talk about how we can do this to conduct this evaluation, or for any other evaluation that you want to conduct. And of course, qualitative evaluation is not that clear, and maybe you realize that you are not aware, that you do not know the different elements. But because we cannot do this exercise, we are going to talk about evaluation. We are going to talk about how we have an analytical sample and the answers. So in the previous slide, you can see that we are going to suppose that we are going to evaluate a program, and this is a scholarship program for high school students. And in this scholarship program, the objective is that individuals finish school or high school. So the program concerning a theory of change considered the fact of granting a scholarship. So they conducted surveys. They included a poor families, and then they granted scholarships. But the one who designed the theory of change thought that they had to grant this scholarship to the head of the household, for instance, if it is a woman, and this was done because they were poor families. So the one who is in charge of resources or income is the mother, and this is how the program operated. But through administrative records, they realized that the program was not working, because it achieved some results, but it was not achieving the impacts or the expected impacts, and therefore they had to analyze the different changes that they had to do. And one of the changes that they thought might work, and that they tried to prove, was that high school students generally are adolescents or teenagers. And when you are a teenager, you try to be independent, especially from your parents. So what happens if, instead of granting the scholarship to the mother, then we grant this scholarship, and we provide this scholarship to the children or the teenagers? So they had a pilot test, and they randomly selected schools in townships, and the ones that were going to the high schools, instead of providing the scholarship to the mother, they provided the grant to the teenager. And then they selected schools with the traditional model, and then they tried to conduct a qualitative and quantitative evaluation in these two places. And these are some of the methodological elements in the following bullets. So this means that we're going to have a treatment group, in which, in the treatment group, the scholarship is going to be directly granted to the teenager, and a control group, and in this case, the scholarship is going to be granted to the mother. So in qualitative evaluation, we say, okay, we accept to conduct this evaluation, but what information do you have? Because in accordance with specialized documents, these are the factors that are related to education. And the ones who were conducting this program said, okay, this is cool, but in our administrative records, we do not have every single one. So this is the information that you need to include. So first, we have to analyze the head of household, if this is the mother or the father, and then we can say if the teenager is living with his parents. We can also analyze the information concerning the if he is the elder brother, because as you might know, of course, it is not the same if you are the first children. So it is, of course, very important for educational achievement. So what we know is that typically the firstborn children tend to have less opportunities, or are generally the ones that attend school first. Because, for instance, if they live in rural areas, they have to finish school because they have to go back to work in the farm, and these are, of course, the first that are used to get married. Or when you are a firstborn, you are not exposed to this kind of responsibilities, because that domestic cycle is better, and the parents have more resources, so they do not need to leave school to work. So of course, sometimes they obtain more benefits. So this of course, this status is very important, and we had that information. We also had the information regarding the gender, if it is female or male, and also information concerning if it belongs to an indigenous population, and the distance from a bank. So this is the information that we had to construct to develop our matrix. So the question that we need to answer is the processes and how are they related, and the hypothesis to evaluate. So this is the exercise that I want you to answer. So I am going to we do not have enough time, so I think that it is better if we stop right now, and without checking the answers, you have to analyze the variables and if they are useful for an analytical matrix. If you are interested in what I am saying, you can you can check the following slides, because there is a way of doing things in the following slides. And in the next session, I am going to explain the solution for this specific exercise. So there is a question here, Johnny. What do you think if we leave this question for the following session, and if we talk about what you were saying? Johnny says, and right now I am seeing this question right now. And he says that we need to have a different categories for individuals when there is a diverse population. And the answer that we have here is something that is going to be answered by the exercise that we have here. So if you agree, we are going to stop right now. We're going to stop with this exercise, and this is a question that we're going to analyze. How do we build an analytical matrix with these different variables: sex, gender, indigenous population, distance, if he or she lives with his parents, if he or she is the firstborn. And so we're going to stop right now, and we are going to continue next Thursday, so that we can explain the answer, and we can also talk about other elements, and also qualitative evaluation and impact, and concerning impact. So thank you so much. Okay, perfect. So have a great day. Thank you so much.